Marcus Chen never imagined that offering his daughter's bunk bed to a stranded traveler would transform his cramped apartment into the cornerstone of a national housing initiative worth millions. He thought he was just being neighborly when Eleanor Rodriguez knocked on his door that rainy October night, her reservation canceled and nowhere else to go. What he didn't know was that she'd been searching for exactly someone like him, someone willing to open their home to strangers in need, and that this single act of kindness would pull his family from financial desperation into a future he'd never dared dream possible. But as Elena quietly observed his daily struggles with his 8-year-old daughter Sophie, taking mental notes he couldn't see, one question lingered in the autumn air. Could this chance encounter really be the answer to both their prayers, or was there something more calculated behind her grateful smile? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The October rain hammered against the windows of Marcus Chen's third-floor apartment in downtown Portland, each drop seeming to echo the mounting bills scattered across his kitchen table. The sound had become a soundtrack to his anxiety over the past few weeks, a constant reminder that winter was approaching, and his savings account was dwindling faster than he could replenish it. His daughter Sophie sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, her math homework spread before her like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen where her father hunched over his laptop, squinting at job postings that all seemed to require qualifications he didn't possess, or offer salaries that wouldn't cover their basic needs. Marcus had been unemployed for 3 months now, ever since the marketing firm where he'd worked as a graphic designer for 6 years had downsized, eliminating his position along with 12 others in a single morning meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. The severance package had seemed generous at first, enough to cover rent and groceries for a couple of months while he searched for new opportunities, but the job market proved more challenging than he'd anticipated. Every interview led to the same polite rejection emails, thanking him for his time while informing him they'd decided to go with another candidate. His unemployment benefits barely covered the rent on their modest 2-bedroom apartment, leaving little room for anything beyond the absolute necessities. Sophie had been remarkably understanding throughout their financial struggles, never complaining when he explained they couldn't afford her usual after-school activities or when their dinners consisted of generic pasta and jarred sauce 3 nights in a row. At 8 years old, she possessed an emotional intelligence that both impressed and worried Marcus, as if she'd been forced to mature beyond her years to help carry the weight of their circumstances. Her mother, Carmen, had left when Sophie was barely 2, unable to handle the responsibilities of parenthood, and disappearing one morning with nothing more than a note apologizing for not being strong enough to stay. Marcus had never heard from her again, and Sophie's questions about her mother had gradually stopped coming as she grew older and understood that some questions didn't have answers worth pursuing. The knock at the door came just after 8 o'clock, 3 sharp raps that cut through the rain's monotonous drumming and caused both Marcus and Sophie to look up from their respective activities. Marcus wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors were rare in their building, where most residents kept to themselves, and interactions were limited to polite nods in the hallway. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a woman in her early 30s standing in the dimly lit corridor, her dark hair damp from the rain and a large backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked tired, but not threatening, and something in her posture suggested she was as surprised to be standing there as he was to see her. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said when Marcus opened the door, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't immediately place. "I'm Eleanor Rodriguez. I had a reservation at the Airbnb downstairs, apartment 2B, but when I arrived the host said there was a mix-up with the booking and the place isn't available. I've been trying to find another place to stay, but everything is either booked or way out of my budget. I noticed you have a car with California plates in the parking lot and thought maybe you might know of somewhere I could stay, or if you could point me toward a reasonably priced hotel in the area." End quote. Marcus studied her face, noting the genuine exhaustion in her eyes and the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with having to ask a stranger for help. Her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, suggesting someone who prioritized function over appearance, and her backpack looked well-traveled, covered in small patches and stickers from various cities and bay organizations. There was something about her demeanor that struck him as trustworthy, a quality he'd learned to recognize during his years as a single father when he'd had to quickly assess babysitters and teachers and other adults who would be around. His daughter. "Actually, that's my car," Marcus said, gesturing toward the parking lot. "I moved here from San Francisco about 2 years ago. As for hotels, there aren't many cheap options nearby, and with the rain and it being Friday night, most places are probably booked solid." He paused, glancing back at Sophie, who had crept closer to listen to the conversation, her natural curiosity overcoming her usual shyness around strangers. "Look, this might sound crazy, but I have a bunk bed in my daughter's room that's hardly ever used. It's not much, but it's dry and warm, and I could offer it to you for tonight if you're comfortable with that arrangement. No charge, obviously. Just one person helping another." Belena's face showed surprise, followed quickly by relief and gratitude. "Are you serious? I mean, that's incredibly generous of you, but I don't want to impose on your family. I'm essentially a complete stranger showing up at your door." She looked past Marcus towards Sophie, who waved shyly from behind her father's legs. "I could pay you something for the inconvenience, maybe $50. I know it's not much, but I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." $50 would actually be really helpful, Marcus admitted, feeling slightly embarrassed by how much that amount would mean to his current budget. "But honestly, even if you couldn't pay anything, I'd still offer. I know what it's like to be stuck in a difficult situation with limited options." He stepped aside to let her enter, noticing how she carefully wiped her feet on the doormat despite the rain soaking through her shoes. "I'm Marcus, by the way, and this is Sophie. She's 8 and generally pretty good at sharing her space with visitors." Sophie emerged from behind her father, extending her hand with the formal politeness she'd been taught. "Nice to meet you, Elena. Dad, should I show her where the bathroom is and where we keep the extra towels?" Her mature response to the situation reinforced Marcus's belief that his daughter had developed coping mechanisms that went beyond her chronological age, adapting to their circumstances with a flexibility that both impressed and saddened him. Elena shook Sophie's hand solemnly, treating the 8-year-old with the same respect she'd shown Marcus. "That would be very helpful, thank you. I promise I'll try not to disturb your routines or take up too much space. I'm usually pretty quiet, and I tend to be up early and out exploring during the day." She followed Sophie down the short hallway toward the bedrooms, her backpack creating a soft shuffling sound against the walls in the narrow space. As Marcus listened to Sophie explaining the apartment's layout and Elena asking appropriate questions about house rules and morning schedules, he felt a mixture of pride and concern about his decision to invite a stranger into their home. Part of him wondered if he was being reckless, potentially putting his daughter at risk for the sake of $50 and his own impulse to help someone in need. But Elena's respectful interaction with Sophie and her obvious effort to minimize any disruption to their lives suggested she understood the trust he was placing in her and would honor that responsibility. Over the next hour, as Elena settled into the bunk bed and Sophie finished her homework at the kitchen table, Marcus found himself observing their houseguest with growing curiosity. She moved through their space with careful consideration, making sure not to leave any of her belongings in common areas and asking permission before using anything, even something as basic as a drinking glass. When Sophie struggled with a particularly challenging math problem, Elena quietly offered assistance, explaining the concept in a way that made it click for the 8-year-old without making her feel stupid for not understanding it initially. "You're really good with kids," Marcus commented as Elena helped Sophie pack her backpack for school the next morning. "Do you work in education or have children of your own?" He was making coffee with grounds that were probably a day or two past their prime, but Elena had declined his offer to pick up fresh supplies, insisting she was perfectly content with whatever they had available. "I work in social services, sort of," Eleanor replied, her answer vague enough to avoid providing specific details while still being truthful. "I've spent a lot of time around families in various situations, so I've learned how to adapt to different household dynamics pretty quickly. Sophie reminds me of some of the kids I've worked with. Very mature, end quote, responsible for her age. She paused, watching as Sophie double-checked her homework folder and lunch money. "You've done a great job raising her, especially considering you're managing everything on your own." Marcus felt a familiar flush of pride mixed with anxiety at the compliment, Praise for his parenting always came with an underlying reminder of how much responsibility rested on his shoulders alone, how there was no backup plan if he made serious mistakes, or if circumstances became too overwhelming to handle. "Some days are better than others," he admitted, handing Elena a cup of coffee in a mug that had seen better days. "The past few months have been particularly challenging with me being unemployed, but Sophie has been incredibly patient and understanding about our situation." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug and inhaling the steam before taking a sip. Employment challenges can put tremendous stress on a family unit, especially when there are children involved. Have you been able to access any community resources or support systems during this transition period? Her question seemed casual, but Marcus noticed she was paying close attention to his response, as if his answer carried more weight than simple polite conversation would suggest. "I've looked into some programs, but most of them have waiting lists or requirements I don't quite meet," Marcus explained, stirring sugar into his coffee and trying not to think about how that sugar packet was one of their last few. "We're not quite poor enough for some assistance programs, but we're definitely not stable enough to feel secure about our future. It's a weird middle ground where you're struggling, but not enough to qualify for help, if that makes sense." Elena nodded thoughtfully, and Marcus caught her glancing around their apartment with what seemed like professional assessment rather than casual observation. She noticed details he hadn't expected a houseguest to pay attention to, like the stack of overdue notices he'd tried to hide behind other papers on the kitchen counter, or the way Sophie automatically turned off lights when leaving rooms, clearly trained to conserve electricity. Her attention to these details made him slightly uncomfortable, wondering if he'd made a mistake inviting someone into their private struggles. After Sophie left for school, Elena announced her intention to spend the day exploring Portland's downtown area and visiting some local organizations she'd researched online. She was deliberately vague about her specific plans, mentioning meetings with community groups and site visits to various neighborhood resources, without providing details that would reveal the true nature of her work in the crass city. Marcus appreciated that she didn't expect him to play tour guide or provide entertainment, instead respecting his need to continue his job search and handle his own responsibilities. Left alone in the apartment, Marcus found himself more productive than he'd been in weeks, perhaps motivated by wanting to make a good impression on their houseguest, or simply energized by the change in routine that Elena's presence had created. He submitted applications to 3 different companies, updated his portfolio website with recent projects he'd completed as freelance work, and even organized the pile of paperwork that had been accumulating on his desk for over a month. The apartment felt less claustrophobic with the knowledge that someone else had chosen to spend time there, as if Elena's willingness to stay somehow validated that their space was worthy of occupation. Eleanor returned that evening just as Marcus was helping Sophie with her spelling words, carrying takeout containers from a Thai restaurant, and insisting that dinner was her contribution to the household for the night. The food was better than anything Marcus had been able to afford in recent months, and Sophie's excitement over trying new flavors reminded him how limited their recent culinary experiences had become. As they ate, Elena asked Sophie about her school day and her favorite subjects, showing genuine interest in the HEIR's responses and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated she was actively listening rather than just making polite conversation. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Elena asked Sophie as they finished their meal, a question that always made Marcus slightly anxious because his daughter's answers often reflected their current financial constraints rather than her actual dreams and interests. Sophie considered the question seriously, twirling her fork through the remaining noodles on her plate. "I want to help people who don't have enough money for the things they need," she said finally. "Like maybe I could work at a place that gives food to families who are hungry. Or help kids who don't have toys or clothes that fit them properly. Dad says helping other people is one of the most important things you can do with your life, even if it doesn't make you rich." Elena glanced at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite interpret, something between admiration and surprise, as if Sophie's answer had revealed something unexpected about their family values. "That's a beautiful goal, Sophie. There are lots of different ways to help people, and many organizations that do exactly the kind of work you're describing. Would you like to hear about some of the programs I've seen that help families in situations similar to yours?" Marcus felt a moment of discomfort at Elena's direct reference to their circumstances, but Sophie nodded eagerly, clearly interested in learning about solutions to problems she'd observed in her own life and theirs. Community. Elena described several innovative programs she'd encountered in other cities, including mobile food pantries, community centers that provided free childcare for job-seeking parents, and organizations that connected families in crisis with temporary housing solutions. Her knowledge was detailed and specific, suggesting more than casual familiarity with these types of social services. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself sharing more about their situation than he'd intended, perhaps influenced by Elena's professional manner and Sophie's engaged participation in the conversation. He explained his background in graphic design, his struggles with finding employment that matched his skills and experience, and his concerns about providing stability for Sophie while managing their financial pressures. Elena listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her understanding of the systemic challenges facing single-parent households. Have you ever considered alternative housing arrangements that might reduce your monthly expenses while providing additional support for Sophie? Elena asked as they cleared the dinner dishes. There are some innovative programs emerging that connect families with complementary needs, creating living situations that benefit everyone involved. Marcus wasn't sure exactly what she meant by alternative housing arrangements, but the suggestion triggered his instinctive wariness about anything that might disrupt Sophie's stability. We've been in this apartment for almost 2 years now, and Sophie is settled in her school and has friends in the neighborhood. I'd be hesitant to make major changes unless our situation became truly desperate. He paused, realizing how that might sound given their current circumstances. I mean, more desperate than it already is. Elena nodded understandingly, not pushing the topic further, but making a mental note that Marcus prioritized Sophie's emotional well-being and educational continuity over potential financial benefits. This preference aligned with patterns she'd observed in other stable single-parent households, where the parent's decision-making process consistently weighed the child's needs against other considerations. After helping clean the kitchen, she excused herself to make some phone calls, stepping onto the small balcony despite the continuing rain to ensure privacy for her conversations. Marcus couldn't hear the specific content of Elena's calls, but he noticed they were lengthy and seemed business-related rather than personal, involving a lot of note-taking and what sounded like scheduling discussions. Her professional demeanor during these conversations reinforced his growing suspicion that she was more than just a casual traveler passing through Portland. Though he couldn't determine exactly what kind of work would require such detailed planning and coordination. When she returned inside, Elena mentioned that she might need to extend her stay by a few days if Marcus was comfortable with that arrangement, explaining that her meetings were taking longer than expected and she was gathering more information than originally planned. The request for an extended stay pleased Marcus more than he wanted to admit, both for the additional $50 per night and for the companionship Elena's presence provided. Sophie had clearly bonded with their house guest, eagerly showing her drawings and school projects she'd completed, and asking Elena to read her bedtime story when Marcus was busy returning phone calls about potential job interviews. Elena's interactions with Sophie were natural and warm, suggesting experience with children that went beyond professional obligation into genuine enjoyment of their company. Over the following days, Elena maintained her pattern of leaving early in the morning and returning in the evening, though Marcus began to notice she was paying increasing attention to their neighborhood and the other families in their building. She struck up conversations with neighbors he'd barely spoken to during their 2 years of residence, learning about their backgrounds and circumstances with the skill of someone trained in community assessment. Mrs. Patterson from the first floor mentioned that Elena had helped her carry groceries up the stairs and stayed to chat about the challenges of living on a fixed income. The young couple in 3A told Marcus they'd encountered Elena at the local coffee shop, where she'd bought their drinks and asked thoughtful questions about their experience as new parents in an expensive city. Marcus found Elena's community engagement simultaneously admirable and puzzling, wondering what motivated a temporary visitor to invest so much time and energy in understanding the dynamics of a neighborhood she'd be leaving within days. When he asked her about it directly, Elena explained that she'd always been interested in how communities function and support their members, describing her behavior as a personal habit rather than professional research. Her explanation was plausible, but somehow incomplete, leaving Marcus with the impression that she was being deliberately vague about her true interests and objectives. Sophie's attachment to Elena grew stronger each day, and Marcus began to worry about how his daughter would handle their houseguest's eventual departure. The 8-year-old had started including Elena in her evening prayers, thanking God for sending them a friend who made their apartment feel less lonely and their problems seem more manageable. When Elena helped Sophie with a school project about community helpers, she encouraged the girl to interview neighbors about their jobs and the ways they contributed to their building's sense of safety and mutual support. The project revealed connections Marcus hadn't realized existed, including Mr. Rodriguez's informal role as building maintenance coordinator and Ms. Chen's willingness to provide childcare assistance during emergencies. On Elena's 5th night with them, Marcus received a phone call that changed the trajectory of their week significantly. A marketing agency downtown wanted to interview him the following morning for a senior designer position that paid substantially more than his previous job and offered comprehensive benefits including health feed, insurance for Sophie. The opportunity represented exactly the kind of breakthrough he'd been hoping for, but it also created practical challenges since the interview was scheduled during Sophie's school hours and he didn't have reliable childcare arrangements. Elena immediately offered to adjust her schedule to stay with Sophie, insisting that helping Marcus pursue this opportunity was more important than her planned meetings for the day. Her willingness to rearrange her own commitments for their benefit touched Marcus deeply, reinforcing his growing appreciation for the unexpected blessing her presence had become in their lives. Sophie was thrilled at the prospect of spending extra time with Elena, immediately planning activities they could do together and expressing confidence that her father would get the job because he was the best designer in the whole world. The interview went better than Marcus had dared to hope, with the agency expressing enthusiasm about his portfolio and experience while indicating that a decision would be made within the week. When he returned home, he found Elena and Sophie engaged in an elaborate art project that had transformed their dining table into a colorful workspace covered with markers, construction paper, and glue sticks. They were creating what Sophie described as a family tree of helpers, documenting all the people in their lives who provided various forms of support and assistance. Marcus was surprised to see his own name at the center of the tree, surrounded by branches representing Sophie's teachers, their neighbors, Elena, and even people like their mail carrier and the crossing guard at Sophie's school. The visual representation of their support network revealed connections and relationships he'd taken for granted, showing him that their family was less isolated than he'd believed. Elena had guided Sophie through identifying these relationships, while adding her own observations about the strength and reciprocal nature of community bonds. "Dad, Elena says that families aren't just people who live together or have the same last name," Sophie explained as she showed Marcus their completed project. "She says families can be anyone who cares about each other and helps each other when they need it. Look, I put you and me in the middle because we're the main family, but all these other people are like family too because they make our lives better and safer." Elena watched Marcus's reaction to Sophie's explanation, noting how his expression shifted from surprise to recognition to something approaching emotional overwhelm. The family tree exercise had been designed to help Sophie understand her support systems, but it had also revealed to Marcus the extent of community connections he'd failed to recognize or appreciate fully. Elena's professional training had taught her that isolated families often possessed more resources than they realized, but needed guidance in identifying and accessing those connections. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Marcus and Elena sat at the kitchen table, discussing the family tree project and what it had revealed about their neighborhood dynamics. Elena asked thoughtful questions about Marcus's relationships with their neighbors and his comfort level with both asking for and providing assistance within their building community. Her questions seemed casual, but Marcus noticed she was taking mental notes of his responses, filing away information about his attitudes toward mutual aid and collaborative problem-solving. "I've never thought of myself as part of a larger community network," Marcus admitted, studying Sophie's colorful diagrams spread across the table. "I've been so focused on maintaining our independence and not becoming a burden to anyone that I missed opportunities to build genuine Connections with people around us. Sophie seems to understand something about relationships that I've been too proud or too scared to recognize. Elena nodded thoughtfully, her expression suggesting she'd encountered similar patterns in other families facing financial stress. Independence is valuable, but isolation can become counterproductive when it prevents families from accessing resources and support that could improve their circumstances. There's a difference between being self-reliant and being unnecessarily alone. She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. Have you ever thought about how your skills and resources might benefit other families in situations similar to yours? Marcus wasn't sure how to answer that question, having been so focused on their own survival that he'd rarely considered what they might have to offer others. I'm not sure what resources we have that would be helpful to anyone else right now. We can barely manage our own needs, let alone help other people with theirs. He gestured around their modest apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture and carefully managed space that reflected their constrained circumstances. Sometimes the most valuable resources aren't financial, Elena suggested gently. You've created a stable, nurturing environment for Sophie, despite significant challenges. Your parenting skills, your professional expertise, even your willingness to help a stranger like me. These are all resources that could benefit other families. And Sophie's maturity and empathy show that your family has developed emotional and social skills that could support other children in similar situations. Marcus found Elena's perspective intriguing but abstract, struggling to envision how their family's coping strategies could translate into concrete assistance for others. Their conversation was interrupted by his phone buzzing with a text message from the marketing agency, informing him that they wanted to schedule a second interview for later in the week. The news was encouraging, suggesting his chances of landing the position were better than he'd initially estimated, but it also created additional childcare challenges since Sophie would be out of school for a teacher BA. Development Day. Elena immediately volunteered to spend the day with Sophie again, but Marcus hesitated to accept her offer, concerned that he was beginning to rely too heavily on someone who would eventually continue her travels and leave them to manage independently. His reluctance prompted a conversation about expectations and boundaries, with Elena assuring him that her offers of assistance came without strings attached and wouldn't create ongoing obligations for either of them. Her professional manner during this discussion reinforced Marcus's growing sense that Elena's presence in their lives was somehow connected to work she was doing, though he still couldn't determine the exact nature of her professional interests. The second interview resulted in a job offer that exceeded Marcus's most optimistic expectations, including a salary that would eliminate their financial stress and benefits that would provide security he hadn't, quote, enjoyed since Sophie was born. The position would require him to start the following Monday, giving him only a few days to arrange childcare for after-school hours and adjust their routines to accommodate his new schedule. Elena's departure, originally planned for that weekend, suddenly felt premature and poorly timed, leaving Marcus to navigate these transitions without the support that had become comfortable and familiar. Sophie's reaction to Elena's impending departure was more emotional than Marcus had anticipated, with the 8-year-old expressing genuine distress about losing someone who had become important to her daily life. Elena handled Sophie's feelings with sensitivity and practical wisdom, helping her understand that friendships could continue even when people lived in different places, and that the positive impact of their time together would remain meaningful regardless of physical distance. She also provided Sophie with specific strategies for maintaining their connection, including writing letters and sharing updates about school and family developments. On Elena's final evening with them, she presented Sophie with a beautiful journal decorated with stickers and colored pens, encouraging her to document her thoughts and experiences as a way of processing changes in her life. The gift was thoughtful and age-appropriate, but it also seemed to carry deeper significance that Marcus couldn't quite identify. Elena's inscription in the journal thanked Sophie for teaching her about courage, resilience, and the importance of maintaining hope during difficult times. Words that seemed unusually profound for a casual acquaintance to share with an 8-year-old. Marcus walked Elena to her rental car the next morning, helping carry her well-traveled backpack and feeling unexpectedly emotional about her departure. Over the course of a week, she had become integrated into their daily routines, in ways that made her absence feel like a genuine loss, rather than simply a return to their previous normal. Sophie waved from their third-floor window, holding her new journal and already planning the first letter she would write to their departing friend. "Thank you for everything you've done for us this week," Marcus said, as Elena loaded her backpack into the car. "You've been incredibly generous with your time and energy, and Sophie especially has benefited from having you around. I hope your travels continue to go well, and that you find whatever you're looking for in your next destination." Elena smiled, but her expression carried a hint of mystery that reminded Marcus of all the questions about her work and objectives that had never been fully answered. "Actually, I think I may have found exactly what I was looking for right here," she said, shaking his hand with the same formal politeness she'd shown when they first met. "Take care of yourself and Sophie, and don't be surprised if our paths cross again sooner than you might expect." Marcus spent his first day at the new job energized by fresh challenges and encouraged by his colleagues' enthusiasm for the projects they would be collaborating on together. The salary was everything they'd promised, and the work environment felt supportive and creative in ways that reminded him why he'd chosen graphic design as a career. Sophie's transition to her new after-school program went smoothly, with the 8-year-old making friends quickly and expressing excitement about the art classes and homework assistance the program provided. 3 weeks passed in a blur of positive adjustments and gradually improving circumstances, with Marcus beginning to believe that their period of financial struggle was truly behind them. Sophie continued writing in the journal Elena had given her, occasionally mentioning their former houseguest in conversations, but seeming to have processed her departure in healthy ways. Their apartment felt more spacious and organized now that Marcus had time and energy for household maintenance projects he'd deferred during his unemployment, and Sophie's improved mood reflected the reduced stress in their daily environment. The phone call came on a Thursday evening in late November, just as Marcus was helping Sophie with a geography project about different states and their economic resources. Elena's voice on the other end of the line was warm and familiar, immediately transporting him back to their week together and the positive impact her presence had made on their family dynamics. She explained that she was calling from her office in Seattle, where she worked for a non-profit organization focused on innovative housing solutions for families experiencing economic instability. "I've been thinking about you and Sophie quite a bit since I left Portland," Elena said, her tone carrying the same professional warmth Marcus remembered from their conversations. "The week I spent with your family provided me with insights that have been incredibly valuable for a project I'm developing, and I was hoping we could arrange a time to discuss some possibilities that might be of mutual interest." Marcus felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension at Elena's call, wondering what kind of possibilities she might be referring to and whether they would require commitments or changes he wasn't prepared to make. "Of course, I'd be happy to talk with you about whatever you have in mind. Sophie has mentioned you regularly since you left, and I think she'd be thrilled to hear that you called. Should we schedule a time this weekend when we could have a longer conversation?" Elena suggested they meet in person, instead of trying to discuss complex topics over the phone, proposing that she return to Portland the following weekend to present what she described as an opportunity that could benefit multiple families while addressing some of the challenges I observed during my stay with you. Her language was professional and somewhat formal, creating the impression that this meeting would be more business-oriented than their previous casual interactions had been. Sophie was indeed thrilled to learn that Elena would be returning, immediately beginning plans for activities they could do together, and asking if Elena would be staying in the bunk bed again. Marcus explained that this visit would probably be shorter and more focused on adult conversations, but that Sophie would certainly have opportunities to spend time with Elena and catch up on everything that had happened since her departure. The 8-year-old's excitement was infectious, reminding Marcus how much Elena's presence had meant to both of them during their difficult period. Elena arrived Saturday morning carrying a professional-looking portfolio and wearing business attire that reinforced the formal nature of her visit. Sophie hugged her enthusiastically, chattering about school developments and showing off improvements in her handwriting and math skills that had occurred during the past month. Elena listened attentively to Sophie's updates, while also observing the positive changes in their apartment's atmosphere and organization, noting improvements that reflected their family's increased stability and reduced stress levels. After spending time catching up with Sophie and touring the neighborhood improvements Marcus had mentioned, Elena suggested they sit down for a serious conversation about the project she'd been developing. She opened her portfolio to reveal detailed presentations, financial projections, and program descriptions that immediately demonstrated the professional scope of her work and the comprehensive research that had informed her proposals. Marcus realized that Elena's casual questions during her previous stay had been far from casual, representing systematic data collection for a project that was much larger and more complex than he'd imagined. I work for the National Housing Innovation Initiative, a non-profit organization that develops and implements alternative housing models for families facing economic challenges. Elena began, her presentation manner confident and well-practiced. Over the past 3 years, we've been researching the effectiveness of host family programs that connect stable households with individuals or families needing temporary housing assistance. Our pilot programs in 5 cities have shown remarkable success rates in terms of both housing security and community building." End quote. Marcus listened with growing amazement as Elena described programs that matched families like his with people needing safe, affordable temporary housing, creating arrangements that provided financial benefits for hosts while offering guests stable environments for rebuilding their circumstances. The programs included extensive screening processes, ongoing support services, and carefully structured agreements that protected all parties while fostering positive outcomes. Elena's presentation included statistics, testimonials, and case studies that demonstrated the measurable impact these programs had achieved in their pilot locations. "When I stayed with your family, I was conducting field research to assess whether Portland's community infrastructure and demographic patterns would support expansion of our host family program," Elena continued, pulling out maps and demographic studies that showed their neighborhood's potential for successful program implementation. "Your willingness to open your home to me, combined with the positive dynamics I observed between you and Sophie and your relationships with neighbors, suggested that this area could be ideal for our next program launch." Sophie, who had been quietly listening to Elena's presentation, suddenly perked up with recognition. "Elena, is this like the programs you told me about that help families who don't have enough money for the things they need? Are you asking if we could help other people the same way you helped us when you stayed here?" Her questions demonstrated that she'd been following the conversation more closely than Marcus had realized, grasping connections that reflected her continuing emotional maturity. Elena smiled at Sophie's astute observation, clearly pleased that the 8-year-old understood the reciprocal nature of the proposed arrangement. "That's exactly right, Sophie. The program would allow your family to earn additional income by providing temporary housing for people in situations similar to what your dad experienced when he was looking for work, but it would also give you opportunities to help other families while building stronger community connections throughout your neighborhood." End quote. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope and implications of Elena's proposal, struggling to process how their casual act of kindness had connected them to a national initiative worth millions of dollars in funding and support. The financial benefits Elena described would provide ongoing supplemental income that could eliminate their remaining concerns about economic stability, while the program structure would ensure they maintained control over their household decisions and Sophie's environment. However, the commitment would also represent a significant change in their family's privacy and routines, requiring careful consideration of both opportunities and potential challenges. Elena seemed to understand Marcus's need to process the information gradually, shifting her presentation to focus on specific details about how the program would work in their household. Families accepted into the host program would receive comprehensive training, ongoing support from professional staff, and carefully screened guests who had been evaluated for compatibility with their specific household dynamics. The financial compensation would be guaranteed regardless of occupancy rates, providing stability that traditional rental income couldn't offer, and families could specify their availability and preferences for the types of guests they were comfortable hosting. "I want to be completely transparent about why I approached your family specifically," Elena said, her tone becoming more personal and less formally professional. "During my week with you, I observed qualities that our most successful host families consistently demonstrate. You prioritize Sophie's emotional well-being while maintaining appropriate boundaries with guests. You're willing to help others without sacrificing your own family's needs, and you've created a home environment that feels safe and welcoming even under financial stress. These are common characteristics, and they're essential for host families who want to make meaningful positive impacts." End quote. Marcus appreciated Elena's honesty about her assessment process, though he still felt somewhat manipulated by the realization that their interactions had been partially calculated rather than entirely spontaneous. However, her observations about their family strengths were accurate and insightful, reflecting genuine understanding of their values and capabilities, rather than superficial flattery designed to encourage participation. Sophie's continued engagement with the conversation suggested she was comfortable with Elena's dual role as both friend and professional evaluator, perhaps because she trusted Elena's intentions regardless of her methodological approach. Elena's presentation continued with detailed information about the support services provided to both host families and their guests, including regular check-ins from program coordinators, access to conflict resolution resources, and connections to additional community services that could benefit everyone involved. Host families became part of a larger network that shared experiences and strategies, creating relationships that extended beyond individual hosting arrangements into ongoing friendships and mutual support systems. The program also provided opportunities for host families to influence policy development and program expansion, giving them voices in decisions that affected their communities. Sophie asked if participating in the program would mean she could help other kids who were worried about their families not having enough money, a question that revealed her deep understanding of the challenges they'd recently faced and her desire to use their improved circumstances to benefit others. Elena confirmed that many program guests were parents with children, and that Sophie would indeed have opportunities to provide support and friendship to kids experiencing situations similar to what she'd navigated during Marcus's unemployment period. "One of the most beautiful aspects of our host family program is how it creates intergenerational connections," Elena explained, showing Sophie photographs from other program locations where children had formed lasting friendships across different families. Kids who have experienced housing insecurity often become the most compassionate and effective peer counselors for other children facing similar challenges. "Your maturity and empathy would be incredible gifts for families who are struggling with uncertainty about their futures." End quote. Marcus found himself increasingly drawn to the program's potential for positive community impact, recognizing that their participation could transform their personal experience of hardship into resources for helping others navigate similar difficulties. The financial benefits were substantial enough to provide long-term security, but the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to solutions for housing insecurity felt equally important. However, he remained concerned about the practical implications of regularly hosting strangers in their home, particularly regarding Sophie's safety and their family's privacy. Elena addressed his concerns by describing the comprehensive screening process that all program guests underwent, including background checks, employment verification, personal references, and psychological assessments designed to identify individuals who would be respectful, responsible houseguests. The program had maintained a remarkable safety record across all pilot locations, with incidents of any kind being extremely rare and always handled immediately by professional staff. Host families could specify their comfort levels regarding guest demographics, length of stay, and household participation, maintaining control over their environment while providing valuable assistance to people in need. "We've learned that successful host arrangements require careful matching of personalities, lifestyles, and mutual expectations," Elena continued, showing Marcus detailed questionnaires and assessment tools used to ensure compatibility between hosts and guests. "Families like yours, who demonstrate stability and emotional intelligence, tend to attract guests who share similar values and approaches to respectful coexistence. The program creates positive reinforcement cycles where good hosts attract good guests, leading to consistently beneficial outcomes for everyone involved." Sophie had been quietly examining the photographs Elena had shared, studying the faces of children and families who had participated in host programs in other cities. Her observations were characteristically thoughtful and mature, focusing on expressions of hope and gratitude rather than the material aspects of different housing situations. When she looked up from the photos, Her eyes were bright with excitement about the possibility of their family joining this network of mutual support and community building. "Dad, I think we should do this," Sophie said with the kind of certainty that had characterized her responses to major decisions throughout their period of financial difficulty. "Elena is right that we're good at helping people feel safe and welcome. And now that you have your new job, we could help other families who are going through what we went through. It would be like paying forward all the help we got from Elena and other people who were kind to us." End quote. Marcus felt moved by his daughter's generous perspective, recognizing that her enthusiasm for helping others reflected values he'd tried to instill despite their own struggles. Sophie's ability to envision their family as a resource for others, rather than simply recipients of assistance, demonstrated a level of emotional maturity that impressed him while also making him proud of the environment they'd created together. Her support for the program carried significant weight in his decision-making process, since any hosting arrangement would affect her daily life as much as his own. Elena provided Marcus with detailed program materials to review at his own pace, emphasizing that the decision should be made carefully and without pressure from her organization's enthusiasm for their participation. The National Housing Innovation Initiative had learned that successful host families needed to feel fully committed to the program's goals and comfortable with its requirements. Since reluctant participants often created negative experiences for everyone involved, she scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following weekend, giving Marcus time to discuss the opportunity with Sophie and consider how hosting arrangements might fit into their family's long-term plans. Over the following week, Marcus found himself frequently thinking about Elena's proposal and its potential impact on their lives. The financial benefits would provide security he'd never experienced as a single parent, eliminating concerns about unexpected expenses or income fluctuations that had created anxiety even during good periods. However, the emotional and social aspects of the program seemed equally appealing, offering opportunities to build meaningful connections with people from diverse backgrounds while contributing to solutions for problems they understood intimately. Sophie continued expressing enthusiasm for the program throughout the week, incorporating ideas about helping other families into her school presentations and conversations with friends. Her teacher commented that Sophie had been particularly engaged during social studies discussions about community resources and support systems, demonstrating knowledge and perspective that seemed advanced for her age group. When Marcus attended parent-teacher conferences, Sophie's teacher specifically mentioned her daughter's growing interest in social justice issues and her mature understanding of economic challenges facing families in their community. Marcus's conversations with neighbors revealed that several other families in their building were also struggling with housing costs and financial instability, despite appearing to manage their circumstances successfully. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that her fixed income barely covered her rent increases, while the young couple in 3A admitted they were considering moving to a less expensive neighborhood because their current housing costs consumed too much of their monthly budget. These conversations reinforced Marcus's understanding that their building's residents formed a community of people supporting each other through various challenges, creating an environment that could benefit from the kind of program Elena had described. When Eleanor returned for their follow-up meeting, Marcus had prepared a list of specific questions about program logistics, guest expectations, and family boundaries that would need to be maintained throughout any hosting arrangement. His questions demonstrated serious consideration of the opportunity, while also revealing his commitment to protecting Sophie's well-being and their family's core values. Elena answered each question thoroughly, providing examples from other host families who had navigated similar concerns successfully. "I want to participate in the program," Marcus announced, after reviewing Elena's additional materials and discussing remaining concerns. "But I need to establish some clear guidelines about how hosting arrangements will work in our household, particularly regarding Sophie's routines and the level of interaction we expect with guests." His decision felt right in ways that surprised him, reflecting confidence in their family's ability to handle new challenges while contributing positively to other people's lives. Elena smiled with genuine pleasure at Marcus's decision, clearly pleased that her assessment of their family's suitability for the program had proven accurate. She explained that the next steps would involve formal application processes, background checks, and training sessions designed to prepare host families for their new responsibilities. The program would officially launch in Portland within 2 months, giving them time to complete preparation requirements and make any necessary adjustments to their living space. Sophie's reaction to her father's decision was enthusiastic but not surprised, as if she'd been confident throughout the week that he would ultimately choose to participate. Her matter-of-fact acceptance of their family's new role as community resources reflected her growing understanding of their place in larger networks of mutual support and assistance. When Elena asked if she had any concerns or questions about hosting other families, Sophie's primary worry was whether they would have enough extra blankets and pillows to make guests comfortable. The formal application process required extensive documentation of their family's background, financial stability, and housing situation, along with personal references and interviews with program staff. Marcus approached these requirements with the same thoroughness he'd applied to his recent job search, recognizing that their acceptance into the program would depend on demonstrating their suitability and commitment to its career goals. Sophie participated in age-appropriate portions of the application process, including interviews where she expressed her understanding of program expectations and her excitement about helping other children. Elena served as their primary contact throughout the application process, providing guidance and support while maintaining her professional objectivity about their candidacy. Her dual role as both friend and program administrator created some complexity, but her transparency about potential conflicts of interest helped Marcus navigate the relationship appropriately. Sophie seemed untroubled by Elena's professional involvement, perhaps because she trusted Elena's intentions regardless of her official responsibilities. 3 weeks after submitting their application, Marcus received notification that their family had been accepted as founding members of Portland's host family program, with their apartment designated as one of the initial hosting locations for the program's launch. The acceptance letter included detailed information about their first guest assignment, a single mother named Maria Santos, who was relocating to Portland for a new job and needed housing assistance while she established herself in the city. Maria's background and circumstances seemed compatible with Marcus and Sophie's family dynamics, suggesting that Elena's matching process had been thoughtful and appropriate. Maria Santos arrived on a cold January morning, carrying a suitcase and a nervous smile that reminded Marcus of Elena's first appearance at their door 3 months earlier. However, unlike Elena's unexpected arrival, Maria's stay had been planned and coordinated through the program's comprehensive preparation process. Sophie had helped prepare the bunk bed with fresh linens and had drawn a welcome sign decorated with hearts and flowers, displaying the same generous spirit that had characterized her response to Elena's original visit. "Thank you so much for opening your home to me," Maria said, as Marcus helped carry her belongings upstairs. "I know this arrangement benefits both of us, but I want you to understand how much it means to have a stable place to stay while I get established here. Moving to a new city with limited resources can be incredibly overwhelming, and knowing I have supportive people around me makes all the difference." Maria's presence in their home felt natural and comfortable from the beginning, perhaps because the program's matching process had identified genuine compatibility between their personalities and living styles. She was respectful of their routines and household rules, while also contributing to their daily life in ways that felt collaborative rather than intrusive. Sophie bonded with Maria quickly, fascinated by her stories about growing up in a bilingual household and her work as a social worker specializing in child welfare services. Within 2 weeks of Maria's arrival, Marcus understood why Elena had been so confident about their family's suitability for the host program. Their household had expanded to accommodate Maria's needs without sacrificing their own family's stability or privacy, creating an environment that felt more vibrant and connected than their previous living situation. Sophie was thriving with additional adult attention and different perspectives on her daily experiences, while Marcus appreciated having another responsible adult in the household who could provide backup support for childcare and household management. Maria's job search progressed more quickly than expected, aided by the stability and reduced stress that came with having secure housing arrangements. Her success validated Elena's belief that providing temporary housing assistance could accelerate people's transition to economic independence, creating positive outcomes that extended far beyond immediate shelter needs. When Maria found permanent employment and began looking for her own apartment, Her departure felt bittersweet rather than simply relieving, suggesting that their hosting arrangement had created genuine relationships rather than merely transactional exchanges. The program's success in their household led to Marcus being offered a leadership role in Portland's program expansion, with Eleanor recommending him for a position as regional coordinator that would involve training other host families and overseeing program development throughout the Pacific Northwest. The position would provide additional income while allowing Marcus to maintain his graphic design career, creating professional opportunities he'd never imagined when Elena first knocked on their door seeking temporary teen shelter. Sophie's response to their family's evolving role in the housing program was characteristically mature and enthusiastic, expressing pride in their ability to help other families while building connections that enriched their own lives. Her journal entries during this period reflected sophisticated understanding of community building and social justice issues, demonstrating intellectual and emotional growth that impressed her teachers and school counselors. When Elena visited to discuss Marcus's new leadership role, Sophie presented her with a hand-drawn certificate, naming Elena honorary member of the Chen family for her role in transforming their lives and connecting them with their community mission. Marcus accepted the regional coordinator position with gratitude and excitement, recognizing that Elena's assessment of their family's potential had opened doors to opportunities that aligned perfectly with their values and capabilities. Their apartment had become the cornerstone of a program that would eventually help thousands of families across the region, transforming a simple act of kindness into a sustainable model for addressing housing insecurity. Sophie's bedroom, which had once felt cramped and limiting, had become a symbol of possibility and community connection that inspired other families to open their homes to people in need. Elena's final visit to their apartment came 6 months after the program's official launch, when she arrived to present Marcus with recognition for his outstanding leadership in program development, and Sophie with a scholarship for summer camp focused on social justice education. Her presence in their lives had evolved from desperate traveler to trusted friend to professional colleague, creating relationships that transcended their original circumstances while honoring the foundation of mutual respect and genuine care that had characterized their first meeting. As they sat around the same kitchen table where Elena had first explained the host family program concept, Marcus reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that rainy October evening when he'd offered his daughter's bunk bed to a stranger. Their family had discovered strength and purpose they hadn't known they possessed, while contributing to solutions for problems that affected their entire community. Sophie had grown into a confident, compassionate young person whose understanding of social responsibility would influence her choices throughout her life. Elena smiled as she watched Marcus and Sophie discuss their plans for the program's continued expansion, recognizing that her investment in their family had created exactly the kind of sustainable change she'd hoped to achieve. Their success validated her belief that individual acts of kindness could be systematically supported and replicated to create large-scale social impact, transforming both helpers and those receiving assistance through carefully structured programs that honored human dignity while addressing practical needs. The story of Marcus and Sophie Chen's transformation from struggling single-parent household to regional leaders in innovative housing solutions represented the kind of outcome Elena had envisioned when she'd first developed the National Housing Innovation Initiative. Their journey demonstrated that with appropriate support and resources, families facing economic challenges possessed remarkable resilience and generosity that could benefit entire communities when properly channeled and sustained. Marcus's final reflection on their experience emphasized how Elena's presence had revealed possibilities they'd never imagined, transforming their perception of themselves from victims of economic circumstances to active participants in creating solutions for others facing similar challenges. Sophie's continued enthusiasm for helping other families validated his decision to participate in the program demonstrating that children could understand and contribute to social justice efforts when given appropriate opportunities and guidance. The apartment that had once felt too small and financially precarious had become a launching pad for a program that would eventually help thousands of families across the Pacific Northwest. proving that sometimes the most significant changes begin with simple gestures of hospitality and human connection. Elena's knock on their door that rainy October night had indeed changed everything, but in ways that none of them could have predicted when Marcus first offered his daughter's bunk bed to a stranded traveler who turned out to be so much more than she initially appeared.